everybody. This is Liza Eintema. I am the president and founder of Dance Data Project. We are in season 2 of Raising the Bar, which is our leadership learning curriculum online, totally free. Today I'm interviewing a dear friend and co-conspirator. This is Kacie Sassano, who is the president and co-founder of the Proper Group.
Thanks for having me, Liza.
Welcome, welcome. So I thought it might be interesting to turn the camera around a little bit. I'm going to introduce Kacie. We'll talk a little bit about how we got to know each other and the work we did together, and then she's going to interview me as the donor because I have a lot of thoughts about that. I've asked for money, we give money away, and there's a better way to do it. So, Kacie, how did you and I meet?
It was about 2012, and I was working at a nonprofit, and Liza came in as a donor, and we hit it off very quickly. We had a lot of energy, a lot of passion for the cause, and I quickly realized that Liza was going to come in and do big things, and I'm always here for big things. So we were off to the races. You brought incredible ideas, and we quickly jumped on the organization's gala, getting started on that.
Yep. I think both Kacie and I had a lot of willingness to try new things, new ideas. I have been to so many galas. I've actually told people, no, I'm not coming to your gala anymore. It was a period of my life, but I think people still talk about it as one of the most fun parties they've ever been to. And I think that's because Kacie and I were willing to try new things. So, Kacie, talk about why you thought our relationship was fun and why everything works so well.
Yeah, I was just thinking through this morning. I had a light bulb moment when we started working together. And everybody knows the prim and proper donor director of development relationship. You come in, you offer a gift, you ask for a donation over a lunch, and you go home and you write your acknowledgement letter. You and I got really deep, really fast because you brought ideas to the organization they had never seen before. You saw areas of growth for the nonprofit, and I was young and willing to take risks, and we jumped in together. But I had that light bulb moment when we wanted to put your name on a donation, a project that you had created for this nonprofit. And you frankly sat me down and said, Kacie, stop asking me to put my name on this. I'm not going to do it because we're not going to fund this project. Well, and I was at a loss. Like, wait a minute, you're not going to fund this project forever? You started it. But you came and said, there's going to be another donor that's just as excited about this. Yeah. And I'm excited about new pieces as I get to learn about an organization. And so I learned really quickly as the advancement officer, the director of development, that I needed to be able to pivot as quick as my donors were pivoting. And you taught me that. And I think you taught other donors to do the same thing.
I mean, that was great. I hope so. So I have done a fair amount of research on women in philanthropy. There is a wonderful organization that turns out reports called the Women's Philanthropy Institute. It is at the University of Indiana. The Lilly family has funded the Lilly Institute. And then the Women's Philanthropy Institute is within that. And women don't give like men. We don't care as much about slapping our names on a wall. We don't care about recognition as much. We tend to believe more in philanthropy as a way to change society. And we like to do it in groups, which is why, of course, so many women end up on women's boards and doing parties, etc. I think a lot of women donors need to move on from that. And I always say, take your philanthropic portfolio as seriously as you take your financial portfolio and try new things. And Kacie and I had a blast doing that together. And then what happened, Kacie?
And then we did an event.
Yep.
And we took a small organization that was raising about $500,000 a year and raised $1 million with this organization.
And then you went on to found your own consulting group. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was through experiences with donors like you, Liza, and really getting my feet grounded in the event space that I saw that nonprofits have the ability through events, whether they're galas, golf outings, luncheons, networking breakfasts, to really take their events from a charity chicken and a silent auction to well thought out productions that are talking about the mission. We learned, and you and I did this together, that the top two reasons why people give is because they are asked and because they are connected with the mission. And we found moments together that we connected people with the mission in physical places. And so out of this was born the Proper Group, the consulting firm that my business partner and I started 4 years ago. We were tired of working with consultants in the nonprofit space. They were suits and high rises that came in with a binder and said, implement this. And these nonprofits, no matter their size, said, well, we can't implement this. We need boots on the ground. We need people to link arms with us. And so was born the Proper Group. And the last 4 years, we've raised over $25 million for nonprofits all over the country. And taking what I learned from our relationship so many years ago.
So what are the 4 or 5 things that to you mark a good relationship with a donor, whether it's event planning or overall?
I think I see the most success when both the development director, chief development officer, donor are willing to be honest, that they come to the table with honesty and integrity. So many times a donor will come in and say, well, I want a building. Well, we don't need a building. And to be able to say that you don't need a building, but here's a project that we think align with your philanthropic desires and what we see your passion projects. And for a donor to be willing to accept that feedback. I think that so many times development officers kind of just roll over and say, okay, we're going to do this, when all of a sudden you're out of budget, you don't have the staff to run the program. So I would say honesty is first and foremost. And then just great communication. I think that's something that you and I started very early, is that we were willing to communicate the small details, but also the big storyline of, and for both sides to listen. So honesty, listening, communication, and then having fun. Yeah. If you're tired of having these conversations with donors, neither one of you are doing it right. It should be fun because you both should be passionate about this mission and you should enjoy the work that you are doing.
Yep. And I think trust is built over a period of time.
Absolutely. And I think that honesty comes out of it. I mean, I think you and I have had some really, both organizations that we're working with or just in the fundraising industry and philanthropy in general, we've had really honest conversations from the two sides that we have sat on.
Yeah. And because I'm definitely a smaller donor, and I'm scrappy and I want to try new things, I am much more willing to hear, I'm not sure that can work. And unfortunately, I think a lot of donors, they've never been told no, and that is the recipe for disaster. Mm-hmm. So as we discussed, this is a two-way interview, and I wanted Kacie to start asking me some questions, because I think very often you don't hear from the donor board member side of the table, and it becomes mysterious, and there are a lot of assumptions. So
I'd love to know, myself and other development directors that have met with you, what's the hook? Like, what's the piece when they sit down with you that makes you want to give? You're passionate about the organization, but talk about like the best asks that you've had.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good place to start. I think what's really important for donors, and I think donors need to educate themselves more as well. Very often, asks are done because somebody asked you, but you don't fit it in. My husband and I really think it through. We're not super wealthy. We take it very seriously. We have a budget. We talk about this over dinner, probably 2 or 3 times a week. Is our money doing what we hoped it would? Is the communication good? What kind of proof points do we want? And I think that gets skipped over far too often on DDP's website. I have a template, and I've done a number of speeches about this. But as a donor, you can create your own template. Ask before you give, because the moment before you hand over the check is the single most important moment. An ask done correctly, I think, is somebody who's done their homework, who knows where Mark and I have given in the past. It's targeted, It's not like we'd like some money because we have a great organization. It's here is why this fits with what you want to see happen. It's financially appropriate. I have gotten some insane asks where somebody clearly doesn't know who I am, who we are. I mean, I'm like, you're talking to the wrong person. And I think it's done as the beginning of a conversation, not yes, no, we're done, which happens way too much.
Yeah, good, great points. All right, let's flip it upside down. Worst ask you've ever seen.
So I think the worst asks, you talked about honesty, are dishonest asks, people that I thought were my friends who asked me out for coffee. And this happened 6 times in a row recently. And it turned out to be an ask. Just tell me up front what it is. I may be blonde, but I'm not dumb. I know what's coming. And it really is gut-wrenching. It hurts on a personal level. So that's number one. Be upfront about what it is. And I will tell you yes or no up front. You're not going to trick me into giving you money. It's just not going to happen. The second big no-no for me, and it makes me literally see red, is, well, what does your husband think? Well, what does your husband say? Or, Mark likes baseball and jazz, so we want you to give us a huge amount of money for this jazz baseball project. And I'm like, are you seeing that I'm the person standing in front of you? You're asking me to fund something for him. And I've literally had the experience where a development person is shaking my hand but pulling me out of the way to get to my husband, assuming he's the decision maker. Which, if you know anything about women in philanthropy, is actually not the case. So again, I think people need to do their research on women in philanthropy and how to approach them. So not recognizing me as the decision maker, being completely off base in terms of the amount. And that leads into the next one, which is a surprising amount of bullying. Mm-hmm. I had an experience recently where I agreed to help somebody, not a female choreographer, but I really respect this person and his work. And I was taken out to lunch by this person and the development director, and my friend / this person I admired left to go to rehearsal. And this was the first time I'd ever met this woman, ever. And it was also one of my introductions to Boston. And I said, well, so-and-so and I have talked about the amount, which I'm sure you know is X. And she leaned forward in her chair and said, no, we were thinking more like 4 times that. I think we've talked about 3 of my, it's not just a pet peeve, it actually feels really disrespectful to me, sort of not learning anything about me or my interests, false pretenses, not being upfront. And then don't try and bully me into giving you more than we talked about. I'm leading up to the biggest one, but last minute asks. So this reminds me of non-fiduciary financial advisors who are just trying to sell you whatever it is that they've been told to unload. It is 100% clear to me, especially if I'm on your board, but generally, if you're trying to shove me into funding something that you came up with and you can't get any money for. I can recognize when this is a Hail Mary because you want to make your budget. And that's not about the mission, and it's not about me. It's about you making your budget. But I think the biggest one, you could probably guess what it is.
Oh, I know what it is.
All right, so.
All right, well, so I think that, like we said, like you and I hit it off quickly, but I think I sealed the deal with you. I was a young 28-year-old, 30-year-old, and I wrote you a handwritten thank you note. And I think you're like, all right, this girl gets it. She's going to be one that I work with. why don't people send thank you notes anymore? Why don't people thank anymore appropriately? I just had a conversation with one of our clients, and she sent me a text. It was actually this morning, and said, Kacie, what's the appropriate amount of time to send a thank you note? And I said, if you don't send a text or an email within 24 hours of the gift, you've missed it. You might as well put that donor away, because they're not going to respond to you. You have 24 hours to thank someone with a phone call, an email, or a text. And in my opinion, you have 3 days to get a handwritten note in the mail.
Yeah, you're better than I am, I will say. But we were lucky enough at Dance Data Project to get a $5 donation from a high school student. I wrote that person a thank you note. First of all, because who knows what will happen in the future, but that's not the point. I had a 15 or 16-year-old take the time to send us some money. That deserves a proper thank you.
Absolutely.
And I am constantly surprised, dismayed, etc., how little I get thanked. Mark and I have had it, and then individually I've had this, when we have made it very clear, okay, here's this gift. It is a big deal for us. We've thought about it. Here's where it fits in. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
And 2 weeks later, this very large institution sent us a very large ask for something else. And I called up, and I probably sounded like I was losing my mind. I was like, and the response that came back was incredibly dismissive. It was, oh, well, that's for another bucket. That's for another thing. And I was like, whew. I don't want to sound like a boomer, but I'm going to sound like a boomer, I guess. When did we lose the idea that a proper thank you is mandatory? And I have been told by executive directors of organizations, first of all, I don't have time to give you my tax return, which is required by the federal government, but sort of the attitude of, we're trying to make great art here, or we're running a program for inner city kids, whatever it is, so I don't have time to thank you. And my response to that is, if you don't have time to thank me, then I don't have time to give you. And there are solutions to this. You can have a bunch of kids sit down and handwrite them, which is good practice for them in life. I mean, you don't have to have always a professional fundraiser.
I will say, like, fundraisers, development directors, it is the first step of your next ask is the acknowledgement letter, the thank you note, and be personable. I can't stand when I get a letter in the mail that is just been a form letter that everybody else has used. Get a small note, handwrite it, stick it in the mail. It goes such a long way, and it's genuine. And I think your donors are being genuine with you. You should try to be genuine with them in response.
But remember that the person on the other side has feelings. I have feelings, and my feelings can easily get hurt, particularly if, and I think this is back to the original thing, you sort of don't take the time to see me, mm-hmm. right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm much more willing to give if somebody thanks me truthfully. And by the way, that thank you doesn't need to be a yacht cruise. It can be, I would like to take you out for a cup of coffee and thank you. And sometimes that turns into a pitch for the next project. But what's really meaningful to me is when somebody says, and I try and do this as well, here's how we used your money.
Absolutely.
So if somebody gives to DDP, here's what $500 buys. Here's what your $5 buys.
Well, and just building on that, Liza, I think that if you can put a name or you can put a project specifically, right? Like that personal story. So for your instance, like, we know that this choreography was developed because of your gift, right? Like, we saw dancers do XYZ. It connects it immediately, and it's that humanistic that makes you feel good.
Or in the case of your most recent incredible success, which I want you to talk about a little bit, 15 kids who are very often first generation got to go to a competitive high school. Yeah. So talk about Daniel Murphy a little bit, because I love Daniel Murphy. Full disclosure, my husband was board president for a while.
Well, the proper group, and me specifically, Kacie, have had the ability to watch Daniel Murphy from being at one of their feeder schools or their partner schools, and now working. The Proper Group had the privilege to produce their 35th annual Golf Classic. It's the largest nonprofit charity golf event in the country. They were at 7 courses just on Monday, June 3rd, and they raised $3 million for the incredible mission and scholars of DMSF.
Which is?
To provide underinvested neighborhood schools, scholars, the opportunity to attend elite private schools in Chicago and then boarding schools across the country. But it does so much more, right? They provide these wraparound services for scholars and their families to ensure that they are on a path to success. They see scholars find their potential and really ignite it so that it's not just college or it's not just what's next for them, but it's taking their whole family to the next level. As you said, first generation, high school, college students now are
Kids of color.
Yeah. And
kids from war-torn zones like, oh, I start crying. Serbia, places like that. So let's talk a little bit about the relationship of donor, development director, donor, person doing the asking, and how you see it working best.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it goes back to what we were talking about of both the donor and the development director rolling up their shirt sleeves and willing to look at data, to look at information, and be able to find, if a donor comes to you and says, we would like to give $5,000 for XYZ project, that project doesn't exist anymore. But to be able to have the honesty to say that back to the donor, but to say, I hear you wanting to do this. This is a project that we are working on. Does this align with your philanthropic giving? But the desire of rolling up the shirt sleeves to be able to sit together and have those realistic conversations. I think that's at the end of the day, that's how you're going to be successful as a fundraiser, but that's how the donor's cup is going to be filled.
Where I get very uncomfortable as a donor is where I see foundation development directors, people in these positions switching roles all the time. And it becomes more, I'm taking my people with me. And, you see it in Chicago a lot, but you see it in Boston a lot. And it's almost as if the organization gets lost. And when you look, which I do a lot, at resumes of people who are applying for development jobs, it's, I've raised this much money, I built a building. What they don't talk about is how they serve the community. And, numbers of she raised 80 million, she raised 90 million, or when you get up at that level, it's usually a he. I'm like, yeah, but okay, show me the metrics on how your community was improved because of that. Similarly, I have a problem when, as a foundation executive, giving money, you're being tasked with a particular mission. And instead, what I hear back, which just floored me, is, oh, I do whatever so-and-so tells me to, an executive director or a CEO, because they've known each other for 20 or 30 years. To me, that's abdicating your responsibility, both in the ask and in the donation. And it's like, well, of course I'll take care of my people.
Absolutely. And I want to go back to your point about changing jobs and development directors, advancement officers jumping around so often. I think that it's really important for people in fundraising to feel connected to the mission. Because one, I think a donor can call BS if you're sitting there reading facts. But anybody can sit there and spew stats. It's what's inside of you, what makes you tick. And I think that development directors will jump around and they can spew a mission and they can spew key talking points. But if it's not inside of them, it's not something that's a burning desire, donors call BS.
When I assess the field, it makes me very nervous when I see somebody who's the president of a foundation that won't get out of their office. I'm actually writing an op-ed about this, which part of the subheading is going to be dirty butts and terrible coffee. Because if you're in a position of responsibility, and I certainly do it, I go sit on the floor, I drink the bad coffee, I see what's actually going on before I make a decision about how I'm going to spend my money. And I wish more foundation officers would do that.
Well, before we wrap up, any other thoughts?
Yeah, a couple. First of all, I don't know if this is true across the board, but I do find it a little worrisome when you see advancement officials, development directors sitting in on programming, content, decision making with the perspective of I can sell that or I can't sell that, because they tend to be older. They tend to want to focus on the 20 or 30 donors that give the big gifts. And I want to turn it back to you. Let's talk about the habit of giving and new younger donors and what your experience with that is.
Absolutely. So part of the Proper Group, we have the privilege of working with nonprofits all over the country. And I would say the nonprofits that we see that are doing it so well right now are those that are focusing on the next generation of philanthropists. They see value in spending time, spending energy, and investing in donors who are coming in at smaller giving amounts. They are significant giving amounts to those donors, but there is such a value in investing time and energy into all donors. It's very unlikely you're going to have someone come in and give you $50,000 out of nowhere.
Yep.
They have to start as a smaller donor. And so it's celebrate that first gift, celebrate a 5 year of giving, and nurturing those smaller donors and coaching philanthropists in fundraising when they come in. They are budding philanthropists.
Yep.
Show them how to do it from the advancement side.
I also thought it would be really useful for people to understand what it's like to be on the advancement side. There's a fair amount of research on the extraordinarily high incidence of sexual harassment because it's usually younger female advancement officers who were sort of put out there and said, make these people happy. And I think that's a situation that's ripe for abuse. And I think organizations really need to ensure the safety of their development people, and also respect that there are working hours. I mean, the stories I hear about phone calls at 2 a.m., whether it's from a donor or other people, can you talk a little bit about that?
It's so unfortunate, and I think people in the development field are so passionate about the organization that they feel they have to say yes to everything, and you don't have to. There are boundaries, there are barriers, and because you become close with a donor does not mean that they get to take advantage of your personal time and most certainly your personal space.
For me, I like to see coaching on boundaries, and also, people deserve a private life and a public life, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that comes from leadership. That comes from the top down of setting those boundaries and respecting that.
Yep, exactly. Well, Kacie, it was great to talk in person. Thank you so much. Thank you all for watching this session of Raising the Bar, Do's and Don'ts of a Donor and Advancement Officer, Development Director relationship. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for having me.